All right, hey guys, thanks for joining us today. And for those of you who know, I am a proponent of using private membership associations in the safe haven umbrella system. And there's quite a number of PMA teachers out there who will tell you that my way of doing it is wrong and in the public. So a lot of these gurus out there say that to truly have your PMA private, we have to have the PMA interfacing with a nonprofit structure. And so, and these same people will say that they're a faith-based 508c1a organization. And so I wanted to share some websites that kind of go into this sort of thing. So let's see here. Let me pull that up. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so, you look up 508 PMA online, and these will be some of the websites that pull up. And this site said, what is a 508c1a? And the 508c1a, faith-based organization, FBO, is a religious nonprofit, tax-exempt organization. The 508c1a FBO is separate and distinct from a 501c3 charity and unincorporated FBOs. The 508c1a is applicable in all 50 states and recognized internationally under the Hague Convention of the United Nations Charter. Okay, so interesting statement there. And we'll kind of pick that apart as we go on, but and then here they say a 518c1a is not a PMA, private ministerial association or private membership association. Interesting. Okay, so this site is unique. They say it's not a PMA. Well, let's go on this site. It says we are a private ministerial association, faith-based 508c1a organization. Okay, so now this one, the Freedom People. What is a 501c1a? Okay, and they're pretty much saying the same thing. And they say you might want to consider a 508c1a or private membership association, PMA. By forming a 518c1a, you can exempt your business from some of the restrictions that may apply to other types of organizations. This includes free speech restrictions, IRS reporting requirements, and various rules and regulations of the IRS. Interesting. That's a strong statement to make. Now, notice they're not citing any actual law citations or anything like that. Now, I was reading the comments at the bottom of this website, and this person asked, does teaching yoga fall under faith-based? And they say, yes, it does. Well, of course, whoever's running this site's going to say it does. I don't know if I agree with that, but I guess that's kind of in the gray area. And then this person asks, what is the criteria for a business? And they answer, a member-based business dealing with living men and women. Okay, well, I think we all are living. Okay, and I know the whole thing that they say your straw man is not your live man or what. Look, there is certain truth in that, but we'll pick that apart later. But okay, and this guy asks, how about a self-employed electrician? Can I be a 508 or a PMA? And they say a PMA would work if most clients are private. If you have some corporate clients and keep licensing, then our trust will protect you. Okay. So we'll pick that apart. But first I want to get into, well, what the heck is a 518c1a? Okay, because I don't want to go just based off these websites definitions. Oh, I forgot. I want to read this one too.
Want to open? Yeah. Say please. You guys say.
And so this one says non-government, non-taxable, not for state profit church. What is a free medical church clinic? What is a church? And it goes into this whole thing. Okay. This site is dedicated to a non-government venue. Okay. I mean, you can claim that all you want, but doesn't mean that's a recognized thing. Is to give place for a 501c1a non-taxable churches ordained by God and not obstructed, restricted, or impeded. Well, this is bad grammar. They're trying to say. Keeping the true separation of church and state for the banks, as well as other organizations wishing to verify and or make donations to 508c1a church house organizations. And then they list some scripture and they try to virtue signal. What is a free church? And I don't think I have to read all this. They pretty much say the same stuff. Section 508 was part of the legislation passed in the Tax Reform Act of 1969, H.R. 13270, codified as public law. Okay, I'm going to address that later. This guy is misinterpreting the whole thing. So basically, these guys are trying to say that because most churches out there in charities, they're going to be 501c3 corporations, right? But these guys say they're different. They're a 508. It's different, they say, than a 501c3. So, okay, so now that we've looked at those sites, oh, and I wanted to address one more thing. At the bottom of this one, he lists 26 USC, and we'll get into that. It has nothing to do with what he's actually talking about. Now, notice that at the bottom of this website, and a lot of these have this, it's a disclaimer. And it says, none of the information on this site should be deemed legal advice or should be acted upon without prior consultation with appropriate professional advisors. So, okay, that's a red flag. Whenever I see something like that, it's basically disclaiming everything that we talk about on our site. Don't take it seriously. Now, so they have a disclaimer at the bottom saying nothing they say is legal or tax advice. But then they're trying to give you tax and legal advice at the top. Why are they trying to evade liability? This makes you question if people run into problems with their system, right? If they're trying to avoid liability, why would you do what they say? And so these sites, they tell you what they deem what a 508 is. And there's endless myths about nonprofits out there, but this one is the most popular one in the private realm. And so all of these gurus pitch that a 508 is an alternative to a 501c3, which is most churches and ministries, right? And as well, we've seen that on that one site we looked at, these gurus, they tell you that your business / PMA can be a 508. And for these looking for nonprofit, and for those looking for nonprofits, the 501c3 is a corporation that's sanctioned in compliance with the government and bodies like the IRS to keep the tax exempt status. And yeah, that's true. And so these gurus will often say something along the lines that a 501c3 are government controlled and not under God. And look, I don't disagree with that entirely, but then they'll go on to say that a 501c1a is a free organization that's still tax exempt and does not have to report or comply with the IRS or anyone else. Well, guys, look, the sad thing is they're misleading people because none of these selling points about the 508 are true. They're pitching you rhetoric to sell their courses or services, and they don't have any factual basis in law to back up the selling points. And so it sounds good to a lot of people because they don't know any better. And so these people that promote 508s are either completely ignorant or they're grifters. 508c1a is not an entity. It's not recognized as a structure of conveyance or recognized organizational structure. It's not a tax or religious status like these people are saying. A 508c3 is a section in the IRS tax code. It's called Section 508. And you can go to the IRS code to find this in Section 508. You can go to US Code 26, because this has been codified as well. And so this section is just law that spells out how a 501c3 applies to get a tax-exempt status and to be recognized as such. And so I want to show you guys USC 26. Let's see here. Okay, let's read it. Now, here we go. Subsection 508, special rules with respect to Section 501c3 organizations. So just in the title, it tells you this pertains to 501c3 organizations. New organizations must notify Secretary, and this is the Secretary of State, that they're applying for recognition or Section 501c3 status, except as provided in subsection. I don't even have to read this for you guys. I mean, really, it's so straightforward. And we'll go into it in a little bit later. But as you can see, where does it say anywhere in this code that a 508 is its own organization structure? It's not. This whole section of the 508 code is explaining how a 501c3 can get the tax exemption status and other stuff about the 501c3. Has nothing to do with what these people are saying. I mean, I don't know how much more clear I can make it. And so, again, it's not a structural status of an organization. And these people, they misinterpret this section, saying this section of the IRS code says that you don't have to comply with the IRS. And it's just laughable because these people not only misinterpret this section of the code, but then they try to weaponize it against the IRS. It's just like the so-called state nationals trying to redefine what USC Title 8 and the Immigration Office code says what a national and non-citizen national actually is. And now I want to show you something else that's on the IRS website that pertains to what we're talking about. Let's see, let me share my screen again. Okay, look at this. Now they claim that a 508 does not have to comply with the IRS. But look at here, IRS Section 508 compliant forms. I mean, look at all these. There's so many. I could keep going and going and going. I could click on each of these and it's going to list all the requirements. But wait, these guys said a 508 doesn't have to comply with the IRS. You see how many forms there are just for 508, Section 508. I mean, you guys, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, look for yourself. Look. So anyways, just wanted to show you that because I thought that was funny. You know, these guys, they make strong claims about the IRS, but have they actually looked at the IRS website? Have they actually looked at the codes? I don't think they have. Or if they are, they're completely ignoring it.
Well, did you see the one word that was most important there too was compliant?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, hello. The first word you come across is compliant. Are you compliant to be protected by 508 status? And the answer, as a church, sorry, no church is allowed. The whole idea behind putting a church in a 501c3 anyway is to put the church under man's law. You think they're going to, oh, well, let's make an exception because we want the church to go back to actually worshiping God instead of the state? No, they're not going to do that. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and on that note, man, where did this come from? Because I'm now kind of curious because ever since I've been in this truth movement, where did this notion that there's some freaking reward right? It's always a reward-based system. There's always some kind of monetary payoff at the end of the non-existent rainbow.
Yeah.
You got to find the end of the rainbow, but there is no rainbow. And it seems like it's that way for everything. Like that is the guru sort of playbook, is that you always have to have some reward, and it's always monetary, of course, at the end of this puzzle or this maze that you have to go through. Where did that come from? I guess that's how they sell it in all cases, and I don't think you could sell it any other way unless there was some monetary or way to protect your money or not pay taxes or whatever the reward is. It's always some form of payoff where you're not going to have to pay as much taxes, or there's always some. Where did that come from? How is that the whole freaking truth movement?
Well, it's funny because a lot of this is in California. I think this is where a lot of this stuff stemmed from. But really it's branched out all across the country now. And this whole thing comes from the whole sole corporation guru movement. And that's probably been going on longer than the 508 thing. But it's all the same stuff at the end of the day, because these same 508 people think it's a sole corporation. And we're going to be getting into that, guys, what a sole corporation is. These things are different brands, right? The 508c1a, the sole corporation, they're just different brands for the same kind of deception. And these gurus say that you're tax-free. You can put all your assets in this church organization, your personal assets, right? Which, if you're an actual church, I mean, we'll get into all that, but basically that's a complete misuse of a church. And I mean, go look on the IRS website.
Okay, so let's put it out here at the beginning. What is a church? Now, the only way to know what a church is to go to the source, which is the Bible. You don't go to the frickin' state to find out what a church is. To them, a church, just like a family is a corporation. Well, a church is a corporation. Well, no. The Bible's against persons. The Bible's against corporations. The Bible's against flattering titles. No, none of that. It's very much like the model of the state. The states are the people. You're not the people. The state is the people. Okay, when you look up the word state, it says people, and when you look up the word people, it says state. You have a representative of the state, and that is the people, essentially, the Senate, right? So when you're talking about a state in the romantic sense, you're talking about this sort of national fervor of a nation being a spiritual concept until it becomes a nation state, like the United States. Right before that, it was a nation. In other words, a compact between people, between states. Well, a church is the same thing. It's a people, right? It's a private foreign people that are not affected by law. In other words, the church has every right, and the people in it have every right to comment on politics, to comment on this, to do this, to participate in everything. But when you're talking about a corporation, then you limit that. The whole purpose of the 501(c)(3) is to silence the church, the real church, the people, the actual physical living people who are supposed to be practicing God's law. You sever that by incorporating. What does incorporate mean? It means to get rid of your body, your soul, and become part of someone else's. You become one body with one voice. Who's the voice of, say, the Catholic Church? It's not the Catholics. No, it's the Pope. Who is the voice of the United Methodist Church? Why, the United Methodist Conference. Because it's a corporation, it has to have a conference, right? So before you could go any farther in understanding this, you have to understand that if you want to be a true church, you're not going to be incorporated at all in any way, whether it's 501c3, 3C, or whether it's being subject to 508 rules, or none of that should ever, no legal standing or rule or public law should ever affect your right of religious freedom and worship. That's the whole point. So
Right.
the whole point of the corporation thing and this, what you're talking about, is to numb, to deaden the ability of the moral compass and the moral law to guide the legal system. The legal system was created to be opposed to the people that are worshiping God and trying to follow God's law. That's the whole point, is to get out of the responsibility of following the law of nature. There's no point in the Bible or the legal law without one. They're like light and dark. You can't have. There's no purpose for the Bible without the legal law. There's no purpose for the legal law without the Bible. They're directly 100% opposed to each other. That's why they exist, and that's why the Pope created both.
Exactly right. And the Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, they are what are called corporation souls. And so I want to show you guys the IRS definition of what a corporation soul is. So let me share my screen again. All right. A legitimate corporation soul is designed to ensure continuity of ownership of property dedicated to the benefit of a legitimate religious organization. A taxpayer cannot use a corporation soul created to avoid or evade income taxes as a means to exclude the taxpayer's personal income from tax. Now, it's interesting. Now that we have their definition, now look at this. IRS warns of corporation soul tax scam. So let's read that. I'm going to zoom in for you guys. Yes. All right. So the IRS today issued a consumer alert advising taxpayers to be wary of promoters offering a tax evasion scheme that misuses corporation soul laws. Oh, kind of like those websites that we looked at, kind of like these gurus out there. There's plenty of them. There's hundreds, especially in the PMA space the last couple of years.
Well, there's also the notion of the corporation soul is to, as opposed to a 501(c), is that you're not incorporating people. You're only incorporating property. That's the difference between the two, in my understanding. So you're not getting any protection for you. You're only protecting your assets in a corporation soul.
Well, and we'll get into how that doesn't even protect your assets.
Well, yeah,
here in a little bit. It's a scheme, just like the IRS says. This scheme shamelessly tries to take advantage of special tax benefits available to legitimate religious groups and church leaders. Okay, yeah, so this is really just for church leaders mostly. Besides the 501(c)(3), this is what the leader would do. Unscrupulous tax promoters always look for ways to game the system and prey on unsuspecting victims. Taxpayers should be on the lookout for these and other scams. And look, this goes on, right? I don't want to read the whole thing. I mean, really, it's kind of boring. But yeah, I mean, look at it. I mean, they talk about, because a lot of these. Okay.
Look at the big sentence there at the bottom. It allows religious leaders, bishops or parsons, to be incorporated.
Yeah.
You don't want to be incorporated. We're promoting non-incorporated, because remember, to be incorporated means to lose your soul. It means to lose your ability to make it. You don't want to be a corporation.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, you guys should read this whole thing, because it completely goes against all of what these people tell you what their thing is. It's the complete opposite of what it actually is. So, anyways.
It also says it's an organization. It's it's not an association, right? The church should be a private associate. The right to associate for purposes of worship.
Yeah.
Private. Not organized as a corporation.
Exactly. And we'll get into the difference between association and organization, something that Clint shared with me earlier. And so we'll be going over, his notes on this whole thing. Okay, so And so the IRS gives self-declared tax-exempt status ability to two groups only. Okay, it's going to be churches. That's number one. Or number two is going to be a tiny nonprofit organization with less than $5,000 a year in revenue. And so when someone says they want to be a 508, I have to ask, do you plan to form a church? And again, 508 is not a tax status. It is a clarification of the tax code that applies to qualified 501c3 organizations, churches, and tiny organizations. There is no such thing as a 508 nonprofit organization. There are 501c3 organizations and these churches and tiny nonprofits that self-declared their tax-exempt status. But see, these 508 people, they say that you can be self-declared as a 508 tax-exempt entity. And so now another sales pitch these 508 gurus and corporate sale gurus claim that these things offer bulletproof asset protection. And they'll cite the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church as examples, but both have had numerous lawsuits and judgments and cases, and a lot of times rape, right? I don't even have to present the cases where this has happened because it's so well known to you guys. So remember, corporate souls, the 501c3s, those are corporations. And because of that, I can sue it. Now, here's some interesting case law related to this. And this is, in quote, the right to sue and be sued is a corporate franchise. American Steel and Wire Company versus Wire Drawers Union. So you might want to think about that. The right to be sued and be sued is a corporate franchise. So these people claim a corporation soul is not a corporation. And there are some, even these guys that call the 508 a corporation soul. And a corporation soul relationship between you and the entity can be subpoenaed and scrutinized, and you'll have to go to court, you'll have to defend a case. There's no charging order protection with the structure. The stuff that I do, we have charging order protection. But with this, you're vulnerable to writ of attachments, judgments, till takes and liens. And so since this is a corporation, you can't represent yourself in court either.
Pull up if you can. Pull up title. Shoot, I'm forgetting. Title 42. That's Title 42, Section 1981.
1 sec. Yeah, let me pull that up.
Probably the most important title.
Title
probably the title. I think it's 42.
42.
Isn't that the one with Social Security and everything?
Title 42, section what?
1981.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing about this one. All right. So yeah, let's read this.
Yeah, well, in there, this is how you know you're in a corporate entity, which is the United States, because what you just said, look at what it says. You have the right to make and enforce contracts and all the terms and benefits, the contractual relationship. You can be sued and sue. You can sue and be sued, in other words. So those are your rights. Now, read that last part there. That's the most important one under C. It says protection against impairment. So the rights protected. Now, what does it say? It says that you shall be subject, in Part A, you're subject to punishment, pain, penalties, taxes, licenses, and exactions, which is essentially extortion of every kind and no other. So government can now do this to all black and white people is basically what it's saying. Equal rights means equal punishment under the law. Now, protection against impairment, what does that mean? Well, gee, this is so important that I can't even tell you. The rights protected by this section are protected against impairment by non-governmental discrimination and impairment under color of state law. Wow. That is such an important statement because that means the state, if you're acting in the United States, the state has no ability to protect you because you're not acting as one of the people. In other words, one of the states.
Yeah.
Okay. There is no way that you can protect yourself under state law because the state recognizes the Constitution, etc., as the law of the land, supreme, right? So what we're telling you is, and you don't want to ever forget this in anything we ever say, we're going back to the states. We're going back to being the people. That's the point. When you're acting privately from or foreign from the United States, you've got to understand you're going back to the state. That's where your law is now coming from. Now the United States has no discrimination or impairment of state law. So the role is reversed. That's the idea of the birth certificate, again, and the creation of the person is to get you out of the state. We want to go back into the state. We want to re-inhabit the states. Not the way that Anna von Reitz and all these bullshitters talk about, right? Not with their little, no, we're talking about really acting the part. We're actually, that's what the PMA is created for, as a sense of proof, a token, if you will, that says, hey, we're agreeing, we're in an association, we're acting privately. You can only do that in one, you can only do that in the state. You're never leaving the law. You're never leaving. You're not going somehow outside. Because remember the prisoner of war thing too.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very important that we read our state constitutions. It's very important that we get familiar with state law if we're going to act in and under that power, because that is where the power to do this is coming from. This isn't necessarily although it's based on, it's not necessarily a God-given right that we're talking about here. We're talking about a PMA forming that in the state, right, based on your God-given rights, which was the whole idea of forming the states in the first place. United States, federalism, all that, a completely different story. When the nation, the spiritual concept of the compact between people, between states to protect one another, becomes a state of its own, which happened all over the world. Now you've got the United States sitting there as the conqueror of the Civil War, right? Now we're trying to re-inhabit and become the people again. You're not Americans, you're United States citizens. We want to become the people again, and to do that, we have to be private. We cannot be citizens of the United States in our actions.
Yeah.
Right? So I just can't, that code right there, anytime you have any question, well, why can they do this? Why can they charge me a ticket? Well, because you agree as a U.S. citizen that it is your right to be put in, to be subject to punishment, pain, penalties, taxes, licenses, and extortion.
Right. And a lot of these state national types or sovereignty types, they think that a contract is something that only you can sign on, right? But there's implied contract. You are using the fiction person. Therefore, because you're privy to the benefits, you're privy to the liabilities because you're using the person. And so that's an implied contract in and of itself of your use of that. And also there's express contract. So it doesn't have to be just a written contract. And a lot of these people say, oh, well, because there's no written contract that I signed, it's fraud. Well, no, it's not that simple. If it was that simple, we wouldn't have this conversation.
Well, read that quote again, because again, all persons within the jurisdiction of the United States shall have the same right in every state and territory to make and enforce contracts and to sue.
Yes.
Okay, what did you just read about the right to sue is a corporate franchise? Well, right. I'm here to tell you, if you look up the word freedom, while in the United States, freedom means franchise, corporate franchise. Voting is considered a franchise.
Yep.
Okay, that's what the definition of voting is a public franchise. So again, you really got to get the idea that we don't want to be in this corporate thing. We don't want to be incorporated in any way, shape, or form, including a corporation soul. That is for, how do you say it, dude? That a lot of this stuff, the UCC and all that stuff, it's for criminals. Yep. It's for highfalutin corporations to get away with murder. It's not for us. Unless that's what you want to do, then go do it. But if you want to be free of all that and be a moral, outstanding man, well, then you don't go into any of this, any of the corporation soul stuff, the UCC, which is created by attorneys. No, you don't go there. Please don't go there
Right.
because you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, and you guys, because these people, they're trying to infest the PMA space with this junk. And look, there is good case law on association when it comes to litigation. And so look at this, a voluntary association, being only a collection of individuals, could not, at common law, sue or be sued by its associated name. Llewellyn versus Woodworker Underwriters, 1919. Another one, there is no principle better settled than an unincorporated association cannot, in absence of a statute authorizing it, be sued in a society or company name.
Why? Why? Because suing is a corporate right.
Yes.
So,
It's
I
a
mean,
corporate privilege.
right there, that tells you everything. I mean, that's so important. Like, I just can't stress. And this is, someone asked me why I don't trust anyone I've come across until I've met Brandon. This is the reason why, because we're both basically freaking bounty hunters after all these false, we're putting these people to shame just by showing you the law. That is why I love this kid. I mean, he's awesome. And we're after the same thing, which is to protect you while trying to also help you do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. All these people, whether they are intentionally misleading you or they're following because someone else told them to, or that whatever it is, it's the same model over and over. It proves her. Just be aware that this is not, they're not doing this because they have experience. They're doing it because they want you to go do something so that they can see if it works.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to do it themselves. Like I said, I will never tell you to do anything unless I do it myself. And I'm doing this myself. And so obviously so are you.
Yeah. And so so these gurus, they'll say, if you use these strategies that we teach you, if the tax liability pops up, put all your assets into this ministry. Well, look, if you got a tax liability and you go in to put your assets into this thing after the liability arises, that's going to be a fictitious conveyance. And so if you think you're a 508 is a real thing and you try to convey assets into it, there's no separation from yourself, since the 508 is only a section of the IRS code. So there's even more laughable in the court's eyes if you try to do that. So you still will be on the hook for everything personally, right? There is no personal separation. And so in the past ruling, Hale versus Henkel, it states, the corporation is a creature of the state. So these guys and their ideologies about freedom precludes forming corporations because they think they're morally superior to corporations. So instead of just admitting that a corporation soul is in fact a corporation, or 501c3 is a corporation, they say it's not. And a lot of these times, they don't reference actual law. It's just theory, right? Like what we saw on those websites I showed you guys. Or even law they do cite, they again take out of context and misrepresent and misinterpret. And so let's face it, all corporation souls are statutory entities and creatures of civil law. The fact they say corporation souls are unregistered is easy to prove otherwise. Corporation souls cannot have existence without first filing government forms with the Secretary of State and the IRS, where the corporation soul resides. And these gurus, most of the time, skip this crucial step, so their corporate souls fail to even exist. And it's something they made out of thin air. And so when the Secretary of State approves the filing, they then hand you the articles of incorporation and publicly register that entity as a nonprofit corporation. You see how fallacious these gurus' criticism of my system is. Because they say my system is too much in the public and theirs is more private. Well, don't believe me. Call any Secretary of State office that legally recognizes the corporate soul, like Nevada, Washington, Oregon. Go ahead and request to speak with the chief legal counsel in the corporation division. When he comes on the line, ask him, is a corporation sole subject to civil law and a statutory entity? And what's he going to tell you? Well, what he's going to tell you is that it's going to contradict everything that these 508 or corporation sole frauds are selling you. And so these guys that work at the Secretary of State, they're very cognizant of this fraud. It's been going on for a long time. And I challenge you to practice deductive reasoning.
Due diligence.
Due diligence, yeah. What has more weight? These gurus' interpretation of the law or the facts that I've presented, including the information on the IRS website that we looked at? And so no real truth.
I'm almost afraid of the answer that people might have to that question, you know?
Oh, yeah.
After all this time listening, I mean, people are really, really brainwashed and confused by the alternative movement. They think the mainstream is bad. I'm telling you, the alternative, I think, is worse.
I think it is, man. You know, I keep getting comment after comment about my criticism of state nationals, and they all repeat the same brainwashed points over and over and over. And they say that I'm brainless. That's what one guy said this morning.
How dare you say we don't exist?
Right. Oh, yeah. So kind of like what Clint said, no real church or ministry should try to use the IRS code as the single source of its legal or lawful existence.
Well, no, it's more important to say that if you do, you're not a real church. You're a corporation. I do not understand the difference. It's like, what the hell? You gotta be real. Keep it pure, keep it of God, not of. Call something a church. I can call it the Church of Satan. I can call it the Church of Weed. That does not, do not use this word church if you don't mean it. If you're not doing it under the word of God, the law of God, then you're not. You're. I mean, what do you say? You can use all these religious terms. You're blasphemy. But I mean, it's just, don't try to be a church unless you're a church, a real church.
Yeah. And our authority to form a church or a private association comes from natural law, not the legal realm. And so it's even more asinine that these people say that you can operate your electrician business through a 508, like what we saw on that website earlier. If you have a business that is not a charity or charitable foundation, you will not meet the requirements to be a 501c3. You won't get a tax-exempt status. So let's say in a different world, you did get those things. Well, you're still not private, and really, it would be a misuse of the 501c3, and it would be scrutinized later on. I know of lawyers that would love to pick this apart, right? This is their bread and butter. They specialize in this kind of thing. So why would you use the nonprofit for business anyway? We've already demonstrated it doesn't protect you from liability, and that's not prudent in risk management. And so I know a lot of people that have gone through the 508 status, or the process, I should say, and they're not able to open bank accounts. How could they when a 508 is only a section of the IRS code? A bank is not going to know what the hell a 508 is. It's not a recognized thing. Now, a lot of these 508 pushers, they know this, so they'll tell people, open a trust bank account. Well, first of all, why not just start telling people about using a trust and not a 508 then? And even with the trust, for conducting business or ministry under a trust is a horrible idea.
What is the answer? Are they purposefully misleading, or are they just ignorant? And I'm afraid to know the answer, because if it really is, if there really are that many people out there designated to misleading people on behalf of, this powers that be, then I mean that's a really scary thought. But if I look at the for instance, the CIA involvement in the media with Mockingbird and all that. Which is on their own website. I mean, how many agents do they have in the media, and how many do they have now?
Right.
I mean, it's I guess to if we're gonna really call the alternative media controlled opposition, well, then you'd have to imagine that there are that many people in it that are controlling it and misleading it, right?
And I think that's why a lot of these people don't go away, right? I mean, we talked about the gurus like David Stray and all those kind of guys. I mean, my thinking is there's now, Clint, you've cited before that there's one reason you know of or you think of that they're not put away is because they're bringing these courts so much revenue, right?
Exactly.
But another thing is too, they're useful idiots. I mean, they're misleading people down the wrong path, and so we're never going to have people actually operating in the private doing these things. I looked at a trust that David Straight gives people in his process, and the whole thing was a bunch of gobbledygook, right? It wasn't even a trust. It was just random stuff, man. I'll have to show you guys sometime. It was just laughable. But yeah, go back to this thing that, these gurus, they acknowledge that you can't open a 508 bank account, right? So they tell you, oh, well, just open a trust bank account instead. And again, this is a misuse of a trust. We should only use trusts and special purpose trusts like a PMA to separate property rights, not to be the banking function for our association. So you're telling me that when people want to pay the association, they have to write a check out to the trust? I don't want the public privy to my trust information. Your trust should be private.
And it's important to state here that the fact that we're talking about this publicly is very rare. In other words, those who are in the private do not come out from the private and share their experience or how to become, because it would be like I don't know, Bill Gates giving away all his stock. They profit from their privacy. They profit from the ignorance of the public that they even exist. So my whole goal and purpose might be a little different than Brandon's in that my whole goal is to expose what this is so that more people can protect themselves, in a way, not necessarily to make money or become some grand poobah of a business or whatever, but to actually be able to form a true church, a true association of people.
Yeah.
Where you can actually act and do the right thing and live the life according to, and keep all the public stuff where it belongs, right? Away from you and out of your name. And right. I just can't tell you how, that is the way the world works. That is how the world is run, from the Bar Association to everything else. Yep. Nation states, everything. I got to tell you, we should do a show just on all of the politicians and their associations, the National Governors Association, the firefighters, the police, the National Mayors Association. They all meet in the single building in Washington, D.C. I think it's called the Hall of States or something like that. Oh. And it's fascinating because, like, the National Governors Association, a private association, they go to Washington, D.C., to be outside of their states and outside, for that matter, of the continental, the United States. Right. They go there to meet. Guess what? That's where they have a copyright of Common Core. They created, or someone else created it, but they approved it. And what happens is, instead of passing things nationally in the federal, they go back to their states with their own copyrighted thing called Common Core and get it passed in the states. They're the governors, right? That's how politics really works, is through these private. Yep. There's like 150 lawmaking agencies, not agencies, but like associations, corporations, these kind of things that actually make the law. All Congress does is get wined and dined and pass the law. Right. They don't write the law. They don't even read the freaking law half the time.
Yeah, they're prostitutes.
It's horrible the way things actually work, but I really want you to understand it's because there's all these associations and foundations and
clubs.
Yeah, that's who's running the show. So if you want to run your own show, guess what? Don't hate it. Hate the part of it that makes it evil, but emulate, do what they do to protect themselves, then start worrying about everything else, right? Then start worrying about fighting it. But until you're protected in a way that the public law doesn't affect your actions in certain avenues, well, then you're The public will protect the private, no matter what.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I shared with Clint, I think last week, the Federal Reserve, they had their own little private club, and not to get confused, guys, because after reading and watching Clint's work, I've come to realize I believe the lie that the Federal Reserve is privately owned and all this nonsense we heard from the John Birch Society and Griffith, what's that guy's name? Creatures of Jekyll Island author guy. We'll get into that. That's going to be probably our next show, guys. How clubs, how these PMAs, they run the world. It's mind blowing, and it's so simple, guys. And people think it's this whole sophisticated thing. It's really not. It's really not, guys. It's something that we can do. It's just we gave up that power to participate in this public law system.
Well, I mean, could you technically not say that being a United States citizen is being a member of a PMA? It's just that it's called the public, right? I mean, it's like it's like a trade union. I mean, my best analogy is that it's a trade unit. It represents employees, really. That's what most of the law is. And consumers, right? So it gives us these insurances and protections, just like the NFL represents basketball player or NFL. football players, and the NHL, the hockey, right? They're all private associations, right? Yeah. So you got to wonder then, how does the NFL, which brings in billions of dollars in profits, how is it a non-profit?
Well, they use that as a cover, right?
Right.
They that's what they want the public to see. Meanwhile, the deep machinations in the background, what's really pulling the levers is the private association. Just like all these things that we mentioned. And so
all they're doing is putting the name NFL on things. Is really all they're doing.
That's doing business as. I mean, that's a DBA, people.
It's disgusting. I mean, it reminds me so much of the Coliseum, you know.
It is the same, yeah.
It is.
So, all right, so to get back to these 508 people, why do these people try to sell you on the idea a PMA needs a 508 involved? It doesn't. A religious organization, religious foundation, or really any organization cannot be commingled with a PMA and truly have it be a private association. And so I want to share with you guys what Clint has to say about this. So let me share my screen again.
Well, let me listen to myself.
Yeah, why don't you? All right. I think one major issue that people aren't paying attention to the words association and organization and how different they are. And he sends me this link. So let's go to the link. Look at this. Organization versus association. What's an organization? The organization is I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. Let's look at this. Organization refers to an entity. Notice that, an entity. That has deliberately been formed for achieving some particular purpose or goal. Association. Association represents any group of people who have joined together in order to achieve a common goal. Notice that. It's not an entity, an association.
So in other words, an organization like a corporation has a single voice, and if you're incorporated under that organization, you have no voice.
Yeah. And these people say, I'm a faith-based organization, but I'm not a corporate. Well, look at here. You're an entity.
I have faith in the mighty dollar.
Yeah. And so members have the right to vote and determine how profits are distributed. Okay. Members for associations have the right to vote and determine how profits are distributed. Interesting. In an organization, members are directly affected by any losses, right? That makes sense. If there's a storm, it's going to affect everyone.
But I'm a 508. How can I be liable?
the association, they do not share liability for any losses. And that's why I love to use associations, particularly for business.
And let it be said that you don't have to use just one association. You can use 1,000 of them if you ever
Right.
get to that point.
You could,
I mean,
yeah.
each one for a different purpose.
The leadership structure is informal for an association because it's private. There's no obligation to keep current on, state obligations with your organization. Look at this. The leadership structure is more formalized. Okay. So in summary,
Oh no, read that last one, because that's a perfect way of looking at it.
Oh, an example of an organization can be your school.
The school, the whole
Oh.
school.
Interesting.
But what's going on inside? Or in fact, it's actually more of an outside thing.
Right.
When you're what is the PTA? What does the A stand for?
Association, right?
Association.
Oh.
So the PTA is not the school.
Right.
It's not an organization. It's an association of, well, if we're being honest, it's an association of a bunch of planted agents that are promoting Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. But,
Yeah.
I digress that it's supposed to be the Parent-Teacher Association.
Yeah.
Right? But it's, obviously been co-opted, as many things have. Most of these things have.
Right.
So, but I think that's a really good way of understanding the school. Do you think a school is, and even if it's a private school, do you think it's private in the capacity that it's, not taxed and all that stuff? No. But when you're talking about a private association, yeah, that is simply a group of people acting together and agreeing that those actions are private, foreign, outside of the the system that is the father of the corporation, the organization.
Yeah. So this contradicts everything these people talk about, the 508 and the sole corporation.
And you notice the word organization is what's being used in that section, the 508, 501c3 section, not associate. It does mention that an organization can have an association, but if the organization has an association, it's part of the organization, therefore not considered to be a private.
Yep. So he expounds on that in here. If churches are organizations, not associations, then we must examine the wording of the law in question to determine whether a private association is subject to these public positive law statutes. Private is the key word, meaning foreign from the public. Let's put this in examination. Here's what the code says. New organizations must notify the Secretary of State, that they are applying for recognition of Section 501c3, status exempt, as provided in subsection C. An organization organized after October 9th, 1969, shall not be treated as an organization described in Section 501c3. Okay, so let's go into that section to see what it is described. Exceptions, mandatory exceptions, subsection A, B, shall not apply to churches, their integrated auxiliaries, and conventions or associations of churches. Any organization which is not a private foundation, as defined in Section 509A, and the gross receipts of which each fiscal year are normally not more than $5,000, like I said earlier.
Doesn't that just about shut down the whole argument when it says that that churches cannot be 508, whatever they'll call it? But it says right there that churches are not exempt. So what? It's just I'm going crazy. This is just basic stuff. Just look at the law. Like as you said about the Federal Reserve, no one read the Federal Reserve Act, so they couldn't possibly know that most of that shit that goes around is bull.
Right. Yeah, and look, guys, I fell for it. I mean, I fell for the longest time until Clint made me think about.
Sorry.
Wait, what actually is this? So yeah, it's your fault, Clint. God. So, hey guys, this stuff isn't mental gymnastics. So, all right. Exceptions by regulation of the Secretary extent is subject to such conditions. So maybe described, it goes on, blah, blah, blah. Education organizations described in section 170. Any other class of organization with respect to which the secretary determines that full compliance with the provisions of subsections is not necessary to the efficient administration of the provisions of the title relating to private foundations. So in the code itself, we already know that a church is an organization, right? And that any association affiliated with the organization is not considered to be a 501c3.
No, is considered.
Is considered to be a 501c3, right? There is no separation. On the other hand, a private foundation, not an organization, is exempt. So it is a private foundation. Well, let's look. Look in 26 USC 509.
No, says the gurus. Don't look. Oh. Don't look at the legitimate code. No.
Doesn't mean anything.
No, please don't. I'm melting.
For the purpose of this title, the term private foundation means a domestic or foreign organization described in section 501c3 other than. Okay. And then, so here we are back to the private foreign membership.
What does domestic mean, right? That's the thing that might throw people. Domestic. Remember that the United States shall protect the states from all threats, foreign and domestic.
Yeah.
That means threats within the state. So to be the domestic is to be essentially, it doesn't mean foreign, but it basically means the same thing. It means I'm domesticated in the state.
So, okay, I'm going to get to you guys in the chat later. I'm almost done here. So the main problem with this approach you seek to debunk, he's talking to me in this email, here's that a church is considered automatically to be an organization, not an association. And even association created under the organization of a church, still part of the church, so cannot be separate or foreign, private, from the public law the church organization is already under. Thus, if you ditch the organization that you call your church and just form an informal private PMA, in its stead, you can have your church unorganized congregation and avoid such federal status altogether because you are now acting private instead of in a public corporation organization. And so this very much shows, again, the power of privacy, of remaining outside of and thus foreign from the public law. Does that sound about right? I think it does, Clint. I think it does. So, I concur with, those things that Clint said. And remember,
you concur with the law?
Yeah, I guess. I guess I will.
How will you ever sell anything if you concur with the law?
Oh, I know. It doesn't sound smooth enough, does it, as a pitch?
No, I know. It's hard. It's hard to sell the truth. I mean, I found that out firsthand. Trying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you don't sell truth. You speak it.
Oh yeah. So guys, remember the story of Jesus when he walked into the temple and they saw they were conducting commerce inside of the temple. He was filled with righteous rage and he flipped the tables and told them to get out. So how's claiming your business is a ministry any different, right? You're trying to mix man's artificial law, 501c3 or 501ca, with a ministry and claiming it's under God? Make it make sense. And so if I was to form a church or a ministry, like Clint said, just have it be a private membership association by itself, not commingle with man's law. And a lot of times people in the 508 corporation soul space are just looking to get out of taxes anyways, right? Besides all the facts that I presented on how this whole thing is laughable. If you want to use this religion exemption for a tax break and for privacy, you're using a ministry for the wrong reason. There are other ways to mitigate a tax liability and obtain privacy, and I demonstrate a lot of these things. And so a religious institution, those are man-made because they are subject to man's legal system. A private membership association already exists in nature, right? They don't need a tax exemption registration or status. Does your family need an IRS section code for existing? No. Does your family need permission to exist? No. Neither does a true church. But a religious organization with a valid tax exempt status does. And more obligations like IRS compliance and Secretary of State compliance. And so I can call a group of people that meet for the purpose of, let's say, expanding their relationship with the creator an association. You guys showing up to meet, and the relationship is naturally an association. Since the church is the people, and the people have the ability to organize in private, they don't need some guru's packet or course to exist and congregate. The fact that these 508 instructors tout that they do God's work should insult your intelligence. So most of you guys that talk to me, you guys are really wanting to run a business, and people are often looking to have that be private. And so, guys, we won't get into how to get all that. I have videos that go into that. So if you want, just watch those. But I go into what that looks like, and we don't really have to go any further into that.
Well, how about we define, because there might be confusion on the word private. Now, I had some, I have a kind of a troll that doesn't really know he's a troll leave this comment. He says, here's why I question private, and he left the definition of Webster's 1828 for private, an adjective from all the Latin, basically, to strip or separate, singular, several, particular to one's self, that is, separate. Okay? Now, let's just break that apart. First of all, you have the several states. What does that mean? Private, foreign states. The states are all foreign from each other, and the United States is foreign from all states. All states are foreign, private from the United States. Okay? So this is a good thing. You're singular, you're acting on behalf of yourself, or particular to yourself, not towards some public interest, okay? The next one is properly separate, unconnected with others, hence particular again to oneself, belonging to or concerning an individual only. That is not meant in the notion that an individual is necessarily a person. They're just referring to a singular, self, as a man's private opinion, business, or concerns, private property, the king's private purse, man's private expenses. Charge the money to my private account in the company's books. Now, here it's just very important to understand that there's a duality when it comes to what we're talking about in this private association thing, because to be private, again, is to be separate. What does the Bible say? Separate yourself. In other words, it says circumcise. That's the real meaning of the word, is to separate yourself from the society that does not follow the law that you seek to follow.
Yeah.
Right? Separate yourself, which is why a real good reason to form a private association instead of an actual church that they're talking about.
Organization.
My idea is more like a monastic type of society, where again you can do business, you just keep it all over here in the trust model, right? So yes, as far as the self, you're private, you're separated, you're unconnected with others, right? But here's the second definition: peculiar. Now you think, well, wait, this is private? Peculiar to a number in a joint concern, to a company or body politic. What's a state? Body politic. As the private interest of a family. Right? All the things we've been saying. Of a company or of a state, opposed to public or to the general interest of nations, meaning nation states.
Right.
Okay, not the good kind, not the spiritual nation, not the belief in something, but the actual incorporation of the nation, right?
Yes.
So here, now we have two different things here. We have to be separate, or we have to be a number in a joint concern. Well, wait a minute, what's happening here? The beauty of this thing that we're talking about is first you set yourself up in your own interest. Then you form these PMAs to be part of the group interest of people that are already private. So you have a duality when it comes to privacy, that yes, it's great to be private, But if you don't have someone else to be private with, what's the point?
Right.
Right? What's the point of saying I'm private if everybody else is public? Well, that means you're going to have to go public just to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? So the whole purpose of this is first and foremost for you to go private, meaning you're no longer in that public realm as much as possible. Secondly, find like minds and join together so that you can operate outside the public. Now, if you're going to, and to separate yourself from that, if you're telling me that that is not exactly, I mean, maybe you don't know because you've never read the Bible, that is exactly what the Bible instructs you to do. It's giving you, I mean, it is basically about going private. It's just, again, unfortunately, this same type of system has been used and abused by the worst kinds of people who have now hidden it from us, especially the church. And so, I mean, I just really think it's important to grasp, again, that duality of not only privatizing yourself, meaning taking your name out of any of this, but also of the formation of a group of private individuals. It is no different, and this is the whole romanticism, the whole patriot mythology, right? It's no different than states, people, the several states coming together in a true union to protect one another. That was a private association. That is what the original United States of America, the States United, there was no contract per se. It was a spiritual nation, a common belief that we all got together and decided that we would be stronger together as private individuals until the nation states came along and took it all over. So all these people in the alternative movement that talk about the republics and going back into there's not necessarily going back. What we can do is, like I said, re-inhabit the birthright that we're given, which is the people of the state, and start acting in that capacity privately from this. And that's the only way you're going to ever. I don't even want to use the word defeat the United States, but it's the only way you're ever going to stop the authority and power of this beast system is to stop participating in it.
Right.
You're never going to get rid of it until enough people go private, enough people go back and inhabit the states, no longer just be a temporary resident, but actually have your domicile in the state. That's what we're talking about doing. It actually, surprisingly, it actually fulfills a lot of what the alternative movement talks about. It's just very different from what we all thought.
Oh, totally. So we got some questions in the chat. Is the trust formation with an LLC to use the LLC in commerce, hence our quote-unquote person, cannot be liable in public? Is the LLC liable in the public? Yeah, well, look, the trust, typically I'm not going to mingle that with the LLC. I'm going to have that separated. So I'm going to have the PMA with the LLC. And the LLC, yes, we use as the stupid person, right? Because
the dummy corporation.
The dummy corporation. We're using that as a new U.S. person that we just created, right? To replace ourselves with. And so, yeah, the LLC takes on all the liability because it has the capacity to take on all that liability.
But the difference here, remember, is what we just read, which is a company. It's a limited liability company, unincorporated.
Right. It's not a corporation. Yeah. Yeah. So, and this was at the LLC thing. Wyoming was actually the first state to implement it in 1998, and it actually comes from Europe, this LLC model, and so we've adapted it since. And it's a beautiful tool if you know how to use it right, but most of the way people use it, it's not even used properly how it should be.
If you talk about the reason for having the LLC, it's merely because the PMA is private. The PMA's existence is to be private from that public thing. And so the LLC, it's like the game of Monopoly. Again, you cannot play Monopoly without an LLC. That's the car, the thimble.
Right.
You have to have some person in the game to play the game, because you can't play it as a real entity, a real man. You have to have some fiction, so that the fictional realm, that it recognizes that as one of its fictional characters. The difference is, again, you're taking that LLC with you when that Monopoly board closes at the end of the day, whereas the US person stay in the game. They're never outside the game. Right? You're the Matrix. You're going into the Matrix on a landline and coming back out of it, back into your real self, whereas everybody else is permanently stuck in the Matrix, in the legal situation.
Yeah. I want the public to see my LLC. That's what it's for, right? That's for third parties to look at, because when they look at the LLC, they like to see that, and it makes them feel good. Meanwhile, they don't know in the background what we're really doing and how we separated our property rights. But yeah, so the LLC is just a tool, and a lot of these 508 people, they hate that I use LLCs, but they don't understand the way I use them. So,
or what they are.
That too, yeah. Because in their mind, that's a corporation. Okay. Well, first of all, and anyone that's worried about liability using an LLC, I mean, look, in the title, it does say limited liability. There is limited liability, but there's a way to use it so that you don't have liability. And I show people how to become uncollectible using an LLC a certain way. We get what's called charging order protection. That's very easy to get. And
but if you're, I stress this again. Yes, this is used by organized crime.
Yeah.
But if you're using it honestly and with integrity, with honor, you have nothing to worry about.
Exactly.
What liability are you worried about at all if you're, again, using it in order to live the life that you're supposed to live?
Oh, but Clint, an LLC is public. Okay, but anyone can look up my LLC, but they'll see my name's not on there. Yeah. Oh. And, I show you guys how to get all that, but, and this guy goes on to say, yes, I have said the public is a type of PMA. It is. Everyone that has an iPhone, that's a PMA. Everyone that has brown eyes, that's a PMA. There's so many that's so big. I mean, and he goes on to say, love it that you say that too. The private is making the laws, the public PMA. And then another person says, also, they claim a 501c1a is shielded from lawsuits. Right. Exactly. Well, in a way, they're right, because it's not even possible to sue a 508 because it's not even a thing. But I can sue the individual all day. I can sue the individual for whatever I want to take all your stuff. You got no charging order protection as an individual. I can take everything from you if you own everything. So yeah, and these people say, "Oh, put everything in the 508, all your assets, everything."
But look, that might be why. Again, that might be why they're telling people to do that, because there's no way to verify it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like when you tell government that your title is allodial. You send them a letter, you think you've accomplished something, but in fact you haven't done a damn thing. Yeah. And in the end it catches up with you, and then you realize, there is liability.
But Clint, I sent an affidavit, and I said this becomes law after 30 days.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Congratulations. If I send an affidavit as a prisoner to my prison warden, what do you think he's going to? They're probably going to read it to his guards and have a laugh.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, well, we got 5 minutes left, guys, before I have to go. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to pop in for questions for I or Clint or anybody. So, if you guys got any questions, feel free to shoot them out. Some of you guys are new. I'm sure you got questions. It's all right if you don't. It's all right if you're shy. Curtis says 100% agree. Stated in honor and righteous reasons. I understand the LLC is our monopoly piece. Thank you both. Yes, very good. Very good.
Mm-hmm. And it really is. I mean, if you really, really understand that we're talking about a completely fictional system, just like any video game or board game that cannot be played without an avatar, then what do you, it's one thing to be private from it, but what happens when you then want to do some sort of commerce with someone in another state, or you want to you have to be able to communicate with that foreign system by having some kind of hack into it, and that's basically what we're doing with the LLC, the company, not the corporation, is to hack the system, and it doesn't know the difference between myself, who's there temporarily, and any other person. It just does its thing. And until someone tries to do something against you, well, if I'm using my person, then I'm wide open for liability, all liability. But if I'm using this, I'm not open. I'm not even a party to it.
Right.
I might be a beneficiary, but that's the most, right?
Yeah. So we got a question. Can you guys elaborate? What exactly is a limited liability? And it's not incorporated. How is it not incorporated? Okay. Well, I'll answer the first part. What is a limited liability, an LLC? An LLC is simply just a company, right? And so it can be started by anyone. Now the company, that LLC is not a corporation. Now the term incorporated, that term gets convoluted a lot. Just because something's incorporated doesn't mean it's a corporation, right? If you go to file a corporation, that's a whole different type of not only business class, but now that's a whole different type of filing.
If you go watch a cooking show, you'll see that they incorporate butter into the fold, or they fold in sugar into the mix. They're incorporating something. It doesn't always take upon itself this meaning that we all have been trained to think.
Yeah. Can I sue an LLC? No. I mean, I can sue the individual that owns it, but I can't sue that. I can sue a corporation though, because as we said in case law, litigation is a corporate franchise. So that's that's really the difference. It's a totally different thing. And so, when you have an actual corporation, there's all sorts of obligations you got to follow with that, right? Yeah. And the ideal LLC setup, it's really just a pass-through. It can be used that way. Really, you can even use the LLC as a trust in a loose way. You can have a beneficiary in your LLC, that kind of thing. So if used correctly, you could use it as a trust vehicle, but really most of the times we just set it up as a pass-through. So yeah, that's a good question though. Thank you. So, all right, guys. Well, I'm gonna get off here. I gotta go, but good chatting with everyone. Good seeing all the newcomers. I try to do this weekly. So next week, I think, Clint, you and I should talk about how PMAs run the world.
I agree. It's really
fun, yeah.
Because it really does open your eyes to this new sort of, I don't know. You remember like the Wizard of Oz, when she goes from the country farm and then all of a sudden everything's in color.
Right.
Like you actually can see the color for the first time when you understand this model and how everything, literally everything that has any, I won't say power, but control, right? Difference between power and control. They don't own anything, but they control it all.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think once you see that, it really does colorize everything to the point where, okay, now I see, for one, that I can do the same thing, but I can also, again, I just hope people aren't, I just hope that by exposing this, the majority of people will see the use in fighting evil instead of becoming part of the evil, is all I can say.
Right. Yeah. And to kind of go back to, the school is an organization, and the parent-teacher associations are used for evil. And yeah, I acknowledge that they are, they're used to purport things like drag queen story hour, right? But that same association vehicle is being used for parents or by parents to go against the drag queen story hour time. And so they're coming together as a collective and going against this thing. And a lot of times they're shutting this stuff down, right? I mean, you saw in Dearborn in Michigan about 2 years ago, they formed an association, and it really wasn't even had to be formal. They just had an association of people because it's natural. And they all went against the stuff that was being taught in the school that they didn't want to be taught based on their religious practices. So, yeah, guys, we'll have some fun with that topic next week, Clint. But until then, guys, I'm going to sign off here. So,
All right. Take care, folks.
all right, bye, everyone. All right.